I have a home office where confidential data from my work is stored. So if you want me to go to her place, I want to be able to secure my things." A police sergeant was called. I repeated my position. With difficulty keeping a straight face, he turned to Christine. "Ma'am, do you have somewhere to go tonight and where to leave your things for the night?" She nodded with tears in her eyes. I thought the cops would laugh when I offered to help Christine carry her things in garbage bags down the street to Sandra's house. Half the neighbors were now watching the show. Several people came to help, hoping to hear the whole story. "Please, can we talk?" Kristen asked plaintively. I replied that maybe in a day or two. With all the activity in my house, Eric and Richard thought they got away with it. This was not the case. Ed and Don watched them as they followed Jason and me outside and watched us drive away. Turning to Christine and Sandra, they kissed them goodbye, but did not caress them, since they were probably being watched by other patrons of the bar. Both men walked to their cars and watched as Christine and Sandra got into Sandra's car. Thanks to the delay, Ed and Don had enough time to remember not only the license plates, but also the make and model of the cars. They even filmed the men kissing the women goodbye. They then proceeded to houses believed to be their own. Ed and Don called Jason to see how we were doing. He told them to come to our house. We sat and laughed at what we had learned. Ed watched me carefully. Finally, I looked at him and asked, "What?" "Dude, you're about to go crazy. I'll stick around to make sure you don't kill anyone," he offered. I was with Don when he went through it. My brother Jason said he said the same thing. "What the hell are you talking about?" I asked, starting to get seriously angry. "Dude, I was where you are now, just like Ed said," Don said quietly. I spent several days crying in my beer, thinking about what I had lost and feeling sorry for myself before I realized how angry I was. I wasn't sure who I was more, angry at myself for being stupid, or my wife and her lover for cheating. Definitely on them. I could barely contain the urge to kill them. Don laughed at the memory. It took a few days, but I started to feel bad for not paying attention and not seeing the signs for so long. I felt like an idiot. "And what did you do?" I asked. I suspected there was much more to the story than they admitted. "Nothing. Just divorce that bitch," Don said with a half smile. "Well, I let the guy's wife know." Ed started giggling. I looked at him. Now I knew there was more to the story. "This is our official history," Ed said. Don lied, and I swore to it. "Sorry, Don, but Jerry needs to hear this." Don smiled and told him to continue. "We started a small campaign against this scumbag on the side. The guy, of course, knew that Crystal was married. Sorry, Don, we try not to use her name. Her new name is Traitor, that's what we call her," he offered by way of explanation. A day later, the guy got his ass. He never saw who did it. He did not need medical attention, just a handful of ice to relieve the swelling. In general, even after his wife found out that he was cheating on her and divorced him, taking him to the cleaners, the guy continued to have all sorts of troubles. His garden house, where he kept his equipment, caught fire. His tires often punctured. He couldn't even go to a bar without someone hitting him. And when he fell, he received several blows to the balls. He was very unlucky. His boss knew he was a fraud and didn't fire him, but said he was on probation. When he tried to change jobs, this story followed him. That is, it was just bad luck, you know, Ed said. "So what happened to him?" I asked. "Oh, he moved to Georgia. Tried to start over," Don said. "It's funny, but a month or so later, his new boss found out why he left Louisiana. It seems they don't like guys having fun with their coworkers any more than we do. He's had a rough couple of years." "Are you really messing around with him for that long?" I asked. "Neither man ever told me about this. It looks like you had to work hard to get rid of him." "Hey, everyone should have their own hobby," Don laughed. "I mean, I still fish and hunt. But I'm not married, so I have a lot of free time at night. The clock keeps asking me to do something. Unless, of course, there is a good movie on." "Of course," Ed offered. "Tell him about her punishment." Oh yeah, it looks like she's having a hard time finding a permanent boyfriend. I mean, more than 2 dates, Don said. Guys may like wild things in the bedroom, but few people like to hear their mothers outraged by receiving video footage of his new girlfriend and her potential sister-in-law having fun with a couple of guys. And all her colleagues have copies of her antics, Don laughed, especially the wives of her male colleagues. They are understandably concerned. I started laughing. Now I regret that I didn't realize, I said, wiping away tears from laughing so hard. I'm missing out on this fun. Don shrugged. It was fun, but I think it's time to move on. Although this bitch will always guess. This requires a lot of effort. Of course she knows who is behind her problems. A few months ago, she asked me what she could do to get me to stop. I was very careful not to give myself away and let her set me up. She would have sued me to death. That's why I never confessed to you guys. Only Ed knew. We laughed. I began to wonder what I could do. Let's think before we act, Ed suggested. You worked quickly. I mean, it's only been 7 hours or so since you found out about all this. The others agreed. Jason reported that his wife, Sue, had talked about taking the time to go to our fish camp and have a drink. The camp technically belonged to our father, but Jason and I used it whenever we wanted. Oh, hell yes, Ed stated. I know my wife will agree with this, especially if I bring a bunch of fish. Yeah, plus, she might get a chance to join Christine and her friend while we're in the swamp. Don laughed, teasing his friend. Nope, not with our prenup. Ed grinned back. She'll have to divorce me first to get anything. Now I feel bad for not protecting myself, I admitted. I knew that Christine's 2 closest friends were sluts in round heels. I should have thought about this. All 3 told me that we all make mistakes. Next time I'll know better. Finally, we went to bed. I lay there for a while and wondered if I could sleep. Then I realized that conversations with friends helped me more than a group of consultants. I felt better. I turned over on my back and closed my eyes. I fell asleep. I woke up refreshed. I didn't even have a hangover. Christine wanted to talk the next day. I asked her why. She approached me mid-morning. I told her that I would only talk to her in the yard and not behind a closed door. I had a phone in my pocket that was recording. She tried to explain how my coming to the bar kept her from doing stupid things. How many times before have you had fun with them or with their other friend Brian, for example? I asked. She looked at me with wide eyes. She realized that I knew much more about her activities than what I had seen in the bar the previous evening. She stammered for a few seconds, but didn't answer. I have good news and bad news, I offered with a smile. She looked at me hopefully. The good news is that I paid off the credit card before I canceled it. I also paid my utility bills, so they're fine for the next month. Plus, I paid off all our loans. We are debt-free. The bad news is we have about $700 left between savings and the check. I took off my half, I said. She looked at me in horror. I shrugged. Some of these bills were long-term bills that we paid off like bills on a car. Both cars were registered in our names. If she couldn't or wouldn't make the payments, I knew the banks would come after me to pay them off. Well, you still have a few options, I said. You and Sandra can move in with your lovers or with Tammy. I'm pretty sure Bob is going to kick her out as part of the prenup they made, and I intend to immediately put our house up for sale. The realtor is the second call I plan to make on Monday. The first one is to the lawyer. Can't we talk about this? Christine said pitifully. What is there to talk about? I asked. I tried my best to remain calm. My heart was breaking, but anger took over. You are the one who decided to play. Pranks. Of course, you knew what would happen when I found out. Of course, you never thought that I would do this. But like I said, you have a choice. Christine looked at me like she had swallowed a baseball. Of course, this could get complicated if one of them is married, I added. I have not yet received a report on their personal life. I'm waiting for him to tell their wives if they have any. They are married. They have children, Christine gasped. You can't ruin their lives. And why is this a problem? I asked, trying to make my voice sound as reasonable as possible. They didn't care about their marriages or mine. So, as far as I'm concerned, all the dirty laundry gets dumped on the floor, and everyone sees it for what it is. Every spot. Now, if you don't have anything worthwhile, why don't you go back to Sandra's house? She started to walk away and then turned around. Did you call Bob? She asked. I realized that this was one of the questions Sandra wanted to know when Christine returned. I smiled and nodded. Of course I told Bob. I did this last night before I got drunk. I brought him up to date and relayed Don's suggestions about getting the finances sorted out first. Bob didn't have as much debt as I did, but he paid off and canceled his credit cards and took 75% of the available cash as required by the marriage contract. He, like me, knew that Sandra would not be able to return the money once she withdrew it from the account. Her measly part-time job barely allowed her to drink wine and go out to dinner occasionally. Bob called me back in the morning to see what I had done and to let me know that he would be back in town late in the morning. I was busy transferring money and was half drunk when we spoke last night. His anger and resentment were palpable. He really loved Sandra. Last year he told me privately that he felt guilty about asking for a prenup, but he signed it anyway when I insisted. Last night he reminded me of that conversation and said that he was now glad he listened to me. I told him to get home safely and we would figure it out together. I watched Christine walk toward Sandra's house. She looked depressed. Her shoulders slumped as she shuffled forward. Of course, these women could emerge victorious and take back their lives. They were beauties. It was only necessary to become professionals, not amateurs. Online was a great option if you didn't become a call girl. They could earn a decent, if not very good, living. I regretted not telling Christine a few minutes ago. I'll have to remember this phrase for the future. I showed my middle finger to the retreating figure. One parting shot. I was thinking about what Don said last night, about how everyone needs to have a hobby, and his hobby was making fun of his ex and her boyfriend. I didn't have the information to do anything about any of these three guys, yet. But I knew where Christine was vulnerable. Was it cruel, even unjustified? Yes, but I did it anyway. I took out my mobile phone. "Hello, Miss Sullivan," I greeted the woman who answered. "Since when do you call me Miss Sullivan?" she asked. "No, since you started dating Christine. I have always been a mother." "Well, that's the problem," I said. "I love you. You have always been by my side. But everything has changed. I want you to know that Christine and I are getting a divorce. To say that the almost 50-year-old woman was shocked would be an understatement." "What?" she exclaimed. "A week ago you told me that you decided to have a child." "Well, that was before I found out that Christine was cheating on me," I said. "She and her friends, Sandra and Tammy, dated 3 guys whenever possible. From what I heard, it was a sex festival with no limits. Christine goes there whenever I'm at my fishing camp. She refuses to go there with me and instead entertains one of these guys." Miss Sullivan asked if I was sure. "I have an audio recording, and last night I followed her to a bar." Her behavior at the bar certainly didn't pass the husband test. In fact, her behavior would be unacceptable in most bars in town, I said. "I have a video recording." "What a stupid bitch," Miss Sullivan grumbled. "I thought she left her wild ways behind when she married you." She said it was true. She started crying. "Please stay close, Jerry. I have to go." She hung up. I felt ashamed that I had hurt this sweet woman, but at the same time, I didn't want Christine to recount our family history and make me look like the bad guy. 30 minutes later, an angry Christine called me. "How dare you, you son of a bitch!" she shouted. "What?" I asked innocently. "You know, how could you tell my mother that I was a fool?" she shouted. "Isn't this true?" I asked. She called me a few more names and hung up. Bob appeared. He didn't even bother to stop by his house. He wanted to talk to me first. After we talked and he had copies of my audio file and the video of Sandra locking lips with a man whose hands seemed to be in places they shouldn't be, we went to his house. "I'm here to get my things, or at least clothes for a few days," he announced. Sandra looked from Bob to me and back again. He took out his mobile phone. "If anything is damaged, destroyed, or otherwise tampered with, I will file criminal charges against you. Let this serve as notice," he warned. He walked around the house and took videos. I didn't think about it. I took out my mobile phone. Christine, I go home and film our apartment. If anything is subsequently destroyed or stolen, I will file criminal charges against you, including if you let your lover into your house and he causes damage. I had no idea if it was legal, but the result was excellent. Christine sat and sobbed. I doubt it would have occurred to her to destroy anything on her own, but I wasn't going to risk it. 24 hours ago, I could not even think that she would cheat on me. Bob grabbed a few days' worth of clothes and we took them to my house. You know, I really thought Sandra had changed. She told me several times that she was a libertine. Well, as she described it, quite wild. But now all that was behind her. She wanted to be my loving wife and mother to my children. I feel like such a fool. A few months ago, she even stopped taking pills. Oh shit, I hope she's not pregnant. Of course, I would do a DNA test, but even if I were the father, I would still be bombarded with child support. I told him not to worry about it until it happened. Don, Ed, and Jason showed up with a couple cases of beer. So everything can be cured with beer, right? I asked. No, it just makes everything a little more bearable, Don replied. I told them what I did to Christine. Don laughed and congratulated me. With my help, Bob did something similar and covered his ass. His debt was smaller, but now it was gone, and he transferred his share to another account. Jason laughed, saying that with the money now sitting in his checking account, he could take an extended trip and spend a few weeks in Cabo. Bob and I needed an account we could put money into. I didn't have many of them, but he did. We couldn't open an account last night, so we transferred the money to Jason's account. My brother punched out the license plates of the cars. Officially, of course, he cannot say anything. But I have names and addresses, Don said. I told them that Christine said the guys were married and had children. Well, before I drink too much, I want to see what I can find out about Wivs, I said. Bob, I'm in the mood for a little scorched earth retribution. What about you? He grinned back and took out his laptop. Finding Eric and Richard was easier than I expected. Both had Facebook profiles with photos of their wives and children. Their wives were on their contact lists. Finding out the mobile phone number of each woman turned out to be as easy as shelling peers. Each man had several contacts named Brian, and this pair was shared. We didn't want to notify the innocent man's wife. I called and introduced myself to Richard's wife. I quickly got to the point. I explained the whole situation. To say the woman was angry would be an understatement. He's cheated before. She was comfortable letting him go out with two friends because she believed it would keep him from cheating, at least in those moments. Let me guess. Brian is one of these friends, but last night he was unavailable. Do you know his wife? She knew. I asked if she would like to meet, and I would give her a copy of the audio file I had, as well as the video I took the night before. She definitely wanted to meet as soon as possible. I suggested that she call Eric's wife, and she said she would do so, as well as Brian's wife, and call me back to set up a meeting. 15 minutes later, she called me. I was amazed at the speed. She told me she wasn't going to waste any time. I made copies of the notes for both women. We met at a local cafe. Bob and I were sitting and standing when 3 women, in casual clothes, came inside. The women looked to be about 30 years old, several years older than us. They wore minimal makeup, but each of them was very beautiful. I offered to buy them coffee, and they agreed. I played them the original recordings. So, this has been going on for a while, said Kathleen, Richard's wife. I told them I had no idea how the men met our wives. They had never seen Sandra or Christina before. I opened Tammy's photo. Brian's wife recognized her. She works with Brian, Tori, or something like that. I saw her at company events. I guess that's where it all started. She and Brian had an affair that developed into full-fledged dates with other women. I explained that I was going to file for divorce as soon as possible, and what Bob and I had done with our finances. I saw their gears move. Well, I'm going to do some shopping before heading home, Richard's wife announced. There is a dress in one boutique that I have my eye on. Maybe I'll find some dresses. A woman I know bought several items and then returned them for cash. Maybe I'll dress up and ask Richard if I look as good as Christine and Sandra last night when he walks in the door, just before I tell him to get the hell out. He'll know something's up when Eric comes home and finds his things on the lawn this afternoon. I'm sure Eric will call him as soon as he arrives, even before he enters the house, Eric's wife said. I told her that I had packed Christine's clothes. I might pack it just to help take it outside, but then I'll throw it all away. I'll just throw away his suits. I like your idea of a horn to alert neighbors. You say they can be bought in the fishing department of any store? I nodded. Bob and I laughed openly. We better get started. They are playing golf this afternoon and will be home around 6. I wonder how many of those golf trips were spent with these women playing with their balls and clubs instead. Another round of laughter. I wondered how long this anger would last before the sobbing started. These women were tough, but I remembered what Dawn said. That's what I said. We have already discussed this among ourselves. After I caught Richard the first time, we even insisted that we all sign a prenuptial agreement. Not too one-sided, but containing serious sanctions, said Kathleen. We had sort of a hypothetical plan to support each other and how we would crucify our husbands for helping or covering up if one of the other guys had an affair. Now we know they are all involved. Our children are already in their teens. They will find out about it today. They are already quite old. The other woman nodded. We said goodbye, exchanging phone numbers. It seems these three decided that using 3 women together would be easier to hide. I never heard where they met. I'm guessing mostly from Tammy. They thought they had everything under control, Bob noted. Thank God your car needed repairs and you didn't sit and wait. Back at my house, we spent the rest of the day drinking beer. For dinner, we had to order food since neither of us could drive. Sandra called Bob. He turned on the speakerphone. Why did you need to get Tammy and Brian involved? They weren't even there last night, she wailed. All 3 of their wives are threatening divorce, and Brian's wife says she's going to report this to Brian's boss. Tammy called us all upset because she could be fired right then and there. I couldn't resist. I started giggling. Let me ask you something, Bob said. We had a bet that you girls mostly met at Tammy's house for your little sex fest. Motel rooms were to become quite expensive and quite limited in space. Sandra muttered something but did not confirm or deny. Well, Tammy is still in deep trouble. It's a pity. She deserved what she got. The next week's action went as we expected. Bob and I hired the same lawyer. We used the services of the person who drafted his marriage contract. Christine and Sandra were served at work midweek. Both houses were put up for sale. We listed our homes for sale with the same agent. We explained the circumstances and said that although we knew we did not have much capital, we were going to negotiate a sale so that we would not have large out-of-pocket expenses. I have often heard that any endeavor is 90% preparation and 10% execution. Divorce is the same thing. Once we got everything moving, our part of the job was almost complete. Then everything was decided by the lawyers. I found a small apartment. It was not difficult to divide furniture and other common property. Most of the things went to separate warehouses. We sold the rest for cash to a real estate company. 7 years later, Sandra, Christine, and Tammy are roommates again. After losing her job, Tammy was unable to pay her rent on her own. She seemed to have a hard time finding another job as good as the one she lost. Her new boss somehow heard the story that she and her roommates were sluts. Each of Christine's co-workers knew what she had done to destroy her marriage. Her work seemed to have stalled, but I bet men were lining up to have some fun, despite the watchful eyes of their wives. Sandra's job at the mall was not enough to support her without outside help. Bob and I followed the girls' relationships for about a year after our divorce. We took a page from Don's hobby book and let any man one of them dated more than twice know all about them. In the end, we got tired of it. Brian was fired at the same time as Tammy. I heard he had some good job prospects. He needed her, of course. His minimum child support and alimony were set according to his post-nuptial agreement. Although I sympathized with his family, his new boss and co-workers quickly learned the details of why he had lost his previous position. He was not a happy camper and was treated like an outcast. Richard and Eric weren't doing much better. although they still had jobs. Bob and I were happy to remain single for now. I was only 29 and in no hurry to get married again. True, I had several prospects. One of the best was the younger sister of one of Jason's colleagues. I met her at a barbecue party at Jason's house. I knew it was a setup. We dated several times and seemed to be compatible in and out of bed. She took up quite a lot of my free time, and I weakened my role in the campaign against the 6 traitors. We both hypothetically agreed to a prenuptial agreement if we ever became serious about marriage. She didn't think it was necessary, as she said one afternoon at the fishing camp. If my husband ever cheated on me, I would feed his ass to the alligators. My sassy little girl. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.